Oval Office. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chester Dello, and this is live.
Yeah, check your watches if we still had them. Thank you for joining us on ABC News, ABC TV, ABC News Radio on Friday the 6th of November 2020 at the end of one of the most tense election weeks in American history, one that may still be very much destined for the courts. We'll be speaking to one of America's leading election lawyers a little later in the show. And then we will turn to the legendary journalist Bob Woodward to reflect on what got us to this point and why he says Donald Trump is simply a failed president. But first, Chaz, bring us up to date live.
Oh. Okay, let's talk about the map as it stands, okay? Now we're not going to talk about Arizona being called quite yet, because without Arizona, Biden is currently at 253 and Trump's at 214. But I think most people are assuming that Alaska is going to be red.
Safe bet.
Yeah, they just do things a little bit slower up there, okay? So that makes Trump, as you can see, 217.
Alaska's been red since Russia owned it, basically.
Yes. Then we've got North Carolina. Still not a sure thing. Trump's only 77,000 votes ahead, and there are still 157,000 votes to be counted, which we will apparently hear about on, get this, November 12.
No hurry at all.
But let's assume that Trump takes North Carolina. He's then on 232 to 253. Next. Now let's talk about Arizona.
Yes.
Now that was called by Fox News and AP on election night.
Which is significant because Associated Press has been the gold standard calling election since 1848.
And the guy who runs Fox News is very good at this.
He's a Democrat.
He is, and he's very good at this. But it's become super close, that Arizona. Trump's only 46,000 votes behind, with 285,000 votes left to count. And we may well find out who wins that tomorrow. But the nerds online reckon Biden will keep it.
That's what the nerds do say.
And ABC keeps sticking with the AP call, and hey, I'm a company man. So let's give that to Biden.
Yeah, it is.
That makes 264 to 232. Then we've got Nevada, which Biden is 12,000 votes ahead in, with 190,000 votes to come. But 90% of those remaining votes are from Clark County, where Biden has been leading by 8% so far. And we'll be hearing at least some of those results at 4 a.m. if you're really keen. But Biden is looking pretty good there.
Yeah.
So let's make that 270.
John Ralston of, who's the kind of the doyen of Nevada politics. We've spoken to him on the show before. He says, this is not even going to be close. Biden's got Nevada in the bag.
Okay, so let's trust him as well. 270 to 232. 270, Biden's president.
He called it.
There we
that,
go.
Anthony Green. He called it.
As long as he holds on to Arizona.
Don't spoil it.
But let's say he does lose Arizona. Well, there's still 2 more states. Then we move on to Pennsylvania, where Trump is still ahead by 18,000 votes. Biden's been catching him all day with a huge mail-in vote turnout. There's 175,000 mail-in votes left to count. So you would think Biden's going to pass Trump easily at the rate he's going. Possibly during this show. I'm going to keep on checking. I'll let you know.
Democrats are convinced that Pennsylvania is also in the bag with a margin of between 40 and 60,000 votes. That's what they've been saying since we spoke to Celinda Lake on Wednesday night's Planet America. We'll see if they're right.
Well, let's see. If we give Pennsylvania to the Democrats, then Biden would be ahead 290 to 232. And if that's not enough insurance, we've finally got Georgia, where Biden is now, just get this, 463 votes behind.
Hot off the press.
Yes, and Biden has 7,658 votes left to catch Trump in. That might also happen during this show. I'm going to keep on checking. If Biden catches Trump in either of those 2 states, that will really put Trump away and people will start making calls, I think. So I'm thinking if that all happens, we're looking at 306 Electoral College votes to 232. But there may be some surprises yet.
I can't cope with any more surprises, Chaz.
By the way, if it does pan out that way, you know who Biden has to thank for that last result in Georgia?
No.
I'll tell you. These ladies from Atlanta's most famous election ad.
Get your booty to the pole, 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 yeah.
Did we get your attention? Good.
So, you really not gonna vote?
Ferguson just elected their first black mayor.
You know how that happened? It's clear Black lives don't matter to some of our current elected officials.
If they matter to you,
Then don't let other people decide who's gonna run your community.
get your booty to the poll.
Get your booty to the poll.
Get your booty to the poll.
Get your vote, yeah, vote, stretch.
That is democracy 2020 style. But back to things that aren't pole dancing. Biden is now ahead on the popular vote by 2.8%. You can expect that to grow to 4 or 5% as the West Coast vote trickles in over the next few weeks. Believe it or not, California accepts ballots for 17 days after the election. Weird place. Finally, though, turnout rate. Preliminary figures suggest that turnout could be over 160 million people. That's 66.9%, or the highest turnout of eligible voters since 1900, John.
20 years before women were given the vote in the United States. Now, Chaz, for the last 2 days, Joe Biden has been trying really hard to project calm and confidence. In fact, he began his briefing earlier today, not even by talking about the election at all, but about the coronavirus pandemic. And America hit a new peak of almost 121,000 new infections today. 1,100 deaths in the past 24 hours alone. As for the election, though, Joe Biden simply called for all the votes to be counted.
Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well. But that patience has been rewarded now for more than 240 years with a system of governance that's been the envy of the world. And we continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed, and we'll know very soon.
Very reassuring. Meanwhile, the president's supporters have been far from calm and reassuring, including his spiritual advisor, Paula White, who is looking for some divine intervention.
I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done.
I love that guy wandering past so much. He's looking down. He's not making eye contact. But look, this is not a joke. When Trump's enablers in the media and his various family members have been amplifying baseless claims of fraud and calling for protesters to swarm locations where the count is being lawfully conducted. Don Jr. today calling on his father to go, quote, total war over this election. Lou Dobbs on Fox Business wants Attorney General Bill Barr to do something about something.
I'd like to take a moment here to implore Attorney General William Barr, a man of distinction, a great service to the country, remarkable talent, to please stand up. Stand up and add your voice to those demanding that the integrity of our elections be protected and, in many states, restored.
And former Trump campaign chairman Steve Bannon didn't look at all unhinged this morning when he said this on his radio show.
Second term kicks off with firing Wray, firing Fauci. Now, I actually want to go a step farther, but I realize the president is a kind-hearted man and a good man. I'd actually like to go back to the old times of Tudor England. I'd put the heads on pikes, right? I'd put them at the two corners of the White House as a warning to federal bureaucrats. You either get with the program or you're gone.
Right, so that's Trump's former top advisor calling for the deaths of the director of the FBI and the top infectious diseases expert in the United States in the middle of a pandemic. Still, some of the pro-Trump protesters have decided to turn on one of their own.
And they're actually chanting Fox News sucks. Fox News sucks. The reason why they're chanting that is because Fox News called Arizona for Biden yesterday.
Finally, something that most Americans may be able to agree on. Meanwhile, from the president himself, there was, of course, this appearance at 2:30 a.m. on the morning after election night.
For the good of this nation, this is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment.
Note, by the way, that unlike what some reported, Trump did not say he wanted the counting to stop there. He said he wanted the voting to stop there, which obviously had already happened on election day.
Sure.
But just in case there was any confusion what he actually meant, he then tweeted, "Stop the count." Well, that is pretty clear.
Crystal, I would have thought.
To which about 1,000 people immediately replied, "Okay, Biden wins 270 to 268, which is what the count would have been at the time." So that was a bold strategy from Trump.
Yeah, and now they're canvassing around Pennsylvania, hoping that Trump supporters are going to send them in absentee ballots that have just been sitting on the kitchen table. We'll see how that plays out. Then, for a day and a half after all of that, it was pretty much like this. Reportedly, the president did want to speak yesterday, but he was eventually talked out of it by aides who thought he would just say something kind of crazy. He finally broke his silence at 6:46 p.m. Thursday night, Washington, D.C. time, and he began with another simply extraordinary claim.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio. To name just a few, we won these and many other victories despite historic election interference from big media, big money, and big tech. As everybody saw, we won by historic numbers.
Now, the president has provided no evidence of any fraud. He falsely claimed that votes had been cast after Election Day, and he went on to allege that the disparity between the public polls and the election results was all a part of a wider conspiracy to steal the election. America's ABC, CBS, NBC and MSNBC all cut away from his 17-minute address at that point.
I don't blame them. It was a real mess. He claimed that the Georgia count was run by Democrats when the Secretary of State there is a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
He suggested that he had strong court claims in Michigan and Georgia that had already been thrown out of court earlier that day. He said that Pennsylvania had been accepting late ballots for much longer than their 3-day limit. It's currently 2 days after the election. But mostly, he spoke at length about a bunch of court cases. Now, a number of these were, as I said, thrown out of court. One or two look like they're about to be thrown out of court. But the main one is the court case we've been talking about for weeks. You're here first on Planet America. In Pennsylvania, they're accepting mail-in ballots for 3 days after Election Day and assuming they were sent before Election Day, even if they have not been postmarked, because not all election mail is postmarked. I want to emphasise that could potentially be a serious legal challenge. But at best, it would only lead to those particular ballots I just described being excluded. And there were only 10,000 of those ballots for the entire day after the election statewide, when you'd expect the vast majority of them would arrive on that day, the day after the election. So if Biden gets more than, say, 15,000 votes or so in front in Pennsylvania, which it's looking like he might, we'll see, then that lawsuit's kind of pointless. Team Trump has also called for a recount in Wisconsin, which is more than fair enough. That's their right. But according to Trump supporter Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, a 2011 recount in Wisconsin led to a swing of 300 votes. A 2016 recount led to a swing of 131 votes, whereas Trump is 20,000 votes behind. So that's a bit of a push for Trump there. And obviously, John, we can expect to add a recount to Georgia in that list as well, for sure.
We certainly can. It is incredibly close. Well, let's get a more formal legal opinion, with all due respect, Chaz. Okay. Paul Smith has argued more than 20 cases before the US Supreme Court, after all. He has worked on many of the most significant legal and voting rights cases in recent decades in the United States. He is also a professor at Georgetown Law. Paul Smith, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. So good to have you there.
Happy to be here.
Earlier today, we heard the President talking about the fact that he won the legal votes and he's only appearing to lose because of these illegal votes. Is there a definition as to what is a legal vote and what is an illegal vote? What's he talking about?
But what he's talking about is not law at all. He's talking about the votes for him are legal and the ones for other people are not. He's essentially what happened here is he convinced all of his supporters to vote on Election Day in person. And the Democrats convinced all their supporters it was safer in a time of pandemic to vote by mail. And so the mailed-in ballots take a lot longer to count. And he knew that by doing that, he would be ahead on election night in many states. And that's how it turned out. And now he wants to disqualify all the votes from the Democrats.
Paul, in your opinion, do any of the legal challenges that you've heard of so far have any legal merit at all?
I've been tracking them carefully. It's difficult, though, because they pop up every few minutes and then they get dismissed almost immediately. But no, there's no merit to them. And, they're mostly a sideshow. They're about trivial little matters like how many observers the Republicans and Democrats can have in the back room when they're counting the ballots. And they're complaining that they would like one more, and they go to a court action about that. He claimed in his speech earlier that there are no observers allowed in some places. That's just flatly untrue. The whole system is being run exactly to the letter like it's supposed to be by dedicated, nonpartisan public servants. And all that's happened here since the election is the votes have been counted, and he just doesn't like the answer.
Now, I know at least one court in Pennsylvania did uphold the Republicans' request to tighten the amount of scrutiny that was occurring with the counters. What was that about? What was the story there?
They asked for having one more observer and to be able to get closer to the actual counting. And there's a discussion about how many people to have in a closed room in a time of pandemic and how close they can get to each other. But it's all details. It has nothing to do with whether or not the vote is really being safely watched. They're just trying to find anything they can to create disruption and hope they could stop the counting for a few hours, as I think they did with that particular claim for a few hours. But Pennsylvania will be done very, very soon, and indeed maybe done already. It's really happening as we are speaking. And so those cases have not had any kind of meaningful practical effect on the process.
So, Paul, if we are seeing a sort of a disruption tactic now, whether it is through these small beer legal cases or indeed the physical in-person protests and sort of disrupting it on the ground as well, that seems to be consistent with stuff that we saw in Florida 2000, I guess. What about, though, the possibility this could also replicate Florida 2000 and get to some really big picture, serious stuff, large chunks of votes being contested? Is that step two? Is that what the next few days might see, or do you expect it's just going to continue being this trivial stuff?
I think part of their strategy for trying to buy a little time and delay the resolution of the whole election is to see if they can find something to fight about. But so far, they haven't found anything, and it's very, very unlikely that they will. If you look at what happened in Florida 20 years ago, first of all, it was tied. It was 500 votes apart in one of the largest states in the country, in Florida. And then they had all these problems with these things called hanging chads, little pieces of paper that were falling off. They had to decide what counted as punching the hole. There's nothing like that anymore. First of all, of course, we don't use that technology anymore for our elections. I learned that lesson. And so they haven't been able to find anything to go to court. The president keeps saying he wants to go up to the United States Supreme Court, but there's no case to go there with. You know, the justices, I'm sure, would rather not get anything from him because it makes them look bad. He's sort of suggested to the American people he owns the Supreme Court. I'm sure they don't think so, and certainly they're not going to overturn the outcome of the election for no reason.
On the Supreme Court, like you say, Trump is very keen to go straight to the Supreme Court. He keeps on saying, what are the factors that determine whether a case does go straight to the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, there is no case that goes straight to the Supreme Court. You have to file a case in the trial court, and then you have to have an appeal, and often through multiple levels. And so, while that can happen quickly in an emergency situation like an election, you can't just go to the court and say, by the way, I would like you to rule that I won the election or something like that. There are people who think the Supreme Court is too political, but nobody thinks it's that political. I mean, it does operate by rules and by law, and the lawyers have to file briefs, and there has to be citations and some reason for the court to act.
The other suggestion that has been made, Paul, is that this could be a battle that doesn't go to the Supreme Court, but it goes to the Electoral College, and that the court cases will target the ability of state-based officials to certify the results to determine the outcome. Is that more likely?
Well, of course, the election has to go to the Electoral College. That's how the president, as a formal matter, is elected. The electors get elected in each state, and then they meet in December. They cast their votes, and those votes are then sent on to Congress to be counted in January. Usually that's all of a formality, but it does seem like the president's last hope, once all the votes are in and he's been declared the loser here, will be to try to prevent some state from having its lawfully elected electors vote. And that such a thing has, of course, never happened in American history. And it's pretty unlikely that he could succeed in getting a bunch of other politicians to engage in what would be a fundamentally anti-democratic thing.
What would that look like, though, Paul? If that were to happen, hypothetically, it would be a matter of blocking certain states like, say, Pennsylvania or Arizona or Georgia from casting Electoral College votes for Joe Biden.
Right. What would happen if it happened, and this is really out there as a theory, but it's been talked about for the last month or so, is the legislature in a place like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, which are both very, very Republican-leaning legislatures, would try to say, well, we're not going to follow the election results. We think they were full of fraud, false, by the way, but they would say that, and say, well, we're just going to nominate the Trump electors ourselves and skip the election part. And when that happens under the system, if that ever were to happen, the governors in those states would still certify the election and still appoint the Biden electors because he won the election in that state. And you'd have kind of competing slates of electoral votes, and there would have to be a process for figuring out which ones count. Even if Trump was able to get some legislature to conspire with him in that way, in the end of the day, if it's clear who won the election, I think the system will hold and Mr. Biden will win the election.
Paul, what's the mechanism of a legal challenge? Can you throw the kitchen sink at a state and just almost like an omnibus of grievances, or do you need to go one issue or incident at a time?
You know, Mr. Trump's style of acting in business has always been, but long before he was president, if he has a dispute, is to hire every lawyer he can find and throw as many things at the person as he can, and basically use the costs of litigation and the burdens it creates to wear the other side down. But you can't really do that in this situation. He's filed a lot of silly little suits. The judges are not interested in them and they're getting thrown out. It's not changing anything. And so there is no kitchen sink to throw unless you have something plausible to say that has occurred that means these election returns are not right. And he hasn't been able to find that. I think it's largely a PR strategy, and it may be a PR strategy aimed primarily at Mr. Trump, keeping him calm down and under the impression that something meaningful is happening to save him from his loss when nothing meaningful is happening at all.
Paul, there's also, of course, these things go both ways. There's also the potential for legal action on the Democrat side as well. Often it seems that there are reports of caches of ballots that didn't make it through the US Postal Service by the deadline. Is there any recourse there, or are the laws pretty clear on that, that if they haven't arrived to be counted in time, well, that's it?
That's pretty much the rule, yes. There were some ballots that didn't make it. There are some ballots in a postal voting system that don't make it in every election. And the deadlines in some states are it has to be there by election day at 5 o'clock. In other states, you have the 3-day grace period, but it has to be mailed by election day. But it doesn't turn out that this postal disruption problem, which everybody was very upset about, has turned out to be all that serious. The turnout in this election is off the charts higher than it's been for 120 years. And the number of mailed-in ballots is much higher than it's ever been in the history of the country. So I don't think we're going to see litigation over. I mean, there was a case trying to force the post office to get as many things delivered as they could on election day. But since then, I think that issue's largely gone away.
Well, Paul Smith, we really do appreciate your expertise. Thanks for taking the time for us.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Huge breaking news from the State Oval Office. It is breaking. From Decision Desk HQ, Chaz, Joe Biden has taken the lead in the state of Georgia.
That is correct. Biden is now ahead by 917 votes, which means Georgia, even if you don't count Arizona, now without Arizona, Biden was on 253. Georgia is worth 16. That takes him to 269.
One vote short of the Electoral College count. He needs to become President of the United States just with Georgia.
And that's if you don't count Arizona, which everyone seems to think he's going to win.
Yes, and Biden's campaign saying they've got this 50,000 vote win coming down the pike in Pennsylvania as well. So that would be 289 right there, but he's not yet leading in Pennsylvania. He may be by the end of the show, Chaz.
We will let you know. By the way, before we'll just move on, but what Paul was saying before about how Trump's team just thrown anything at the wall, I should say that one of the Republicans involved in the effort explicitly just out loud told the Washington Post that the campaign is looking for examples, no matter how small, to highlight. So they're being brazen about it, their strategy. And I have to say, I do find the cynicism of it quite disheartening. I mean, Trump's tweeting out stuff like this. How come every time they count mail-in ballot dumps, like in Georgia just now, they are so devastating in their percentage and power of destruction? Now, Trump knows why mail-in votes are favouring Biden so much. It's because he spent 2 months vilifying mail-in ballots to his supporters. That's why. In Michigan, his supporters literally burned their mail-in ballot applications at rallies. They set them on fire. Surprise, surprise, not many of them would have voted by mail. Also, this legal strategy is obviously confected. Jonathan Swan reported weeks ago that Team Trump was planning as a strategy to sit on an election night lead before the mail-in votes have been counted, and then to pretend that just the act of counting mail-in votes was stealing the election. Trump's spokesperson, Jason Miller, pretty much said it out loud a week ago.
If you speak with many smart Democrats, they believe that President Trump will be ahead on election night, probably getting 280 electorals, somewhere in that range. And then they're going to try to steal it back after the election.
Of course, this is all just to prove once and for all that they didn't collude with Russia in 2016, because they are the worst criminals out there. They're terrible at this subterfuge.
That's true. It's conclusive proof. But as transparent as that ploy is, it does work. Now you've got Trump supporters outside ballot counting centres screaming, "Stop the count!" And they're not talking about the count from Sesame Street. They're coming up with excellent reasons to stop the count as well, like this here.
Family stealing the election. The media's covering up. The Biden crime family stealing this election. The media's covering it up. The Biden crime family stealing this election. The media's covering up. We want our freedom for the world. Give us our freedom, Joe Biden. Joe Biden's covering up this election. He's stealing it.
I love the way that he's obviously expecting someone to jump in and
right,
arrest
exactly.
him. No one, they all look bored at him, so he just awkwardly walks
He was
away.
expecting to start ranting about, you're stopping my freedom of speech, you're stopping my freedom of speech.
Yeah. It is quite funny stuff. But there is, oh, by the way, actually, before I forget, while during that clip, I was just looking through the numbers. You know how I said Arizona is enough to get him over?
Yes.
Nevada is as well.
Yeah, right.
They're definitely going to win Nevada.
Yeah, exactly. That is all the advice right now. But look, and there is a significant issue about, I mean, on the one hand, the good thing is we haven't seen what we saw back in the summertime where we had two opposing sides angry, fighting each other, leading to violence and death. That is the good news right now.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of people in the media who are certainly fanning these flames and trying to incite something which is very much a part of this legal strategy as well, which is disrupt things as much as you possibly can until we get to the stage where we can think about a sound legal argument to intervene right now.
Yeah, the question though, I mean, you're right, the media are going crazy, especially conservative media, but the question is, what about the other people, the people in the opinion leaders in the GOP? What are they saying about this, okay? Because if it's just Trump and Tucker Carlson saying the election's rigged, that's one thing. That will be a lot less convincing to the base than if the entire Republican leadership is speaking as one, saying that the election is rigged. And that's why I was so pleased to see Mitch McConnell say this right after Trump's first post-election press conference.
Well, it's not unusual for people to claim they won the election. I can think of that happening on numerous occasions, but claiming you win the election is different from finishing the counting.
So my question is, how damaging do you think this rhetoric is?
Well, it's further damaging to Trump's reputation, which is frankly not great with at least half of America right now and a lot of the world. The biggest concern, of course, though, is that this is damaging to American democracy. This is why Russia and other international actors got themselves involved in the 2016 election and the 2020 election. Their number one plan was create chaos, discredit America's democracy, use its freedoms against it, its free media, its free speech, its social media and its democracy, and turn these things against America to discredit America around the world so it is no longer a shining city on the hill. They've done it. They've done it, and they're still doing it in this post-election period.
And by the way, it also discredits their Supreme Court strategy. The Supreme Court doesn't want to touch this.
Right.
And so it's actually dysfunctional. It's self-sabotage, really. Anyway, other people competed in Tuesday's election, and we should talk about them a bit as well. Like the House, for instance. There's still plenty of counting going on there. There's 33 seats left to be called, but it's already clear the Democrats who were predicted to increase their margin in the House, they had a bad night there as well. The Republicans have flipped 8 seats already, with plenty more in the works. Democrats have only flipped 2 Republican seats. That's a net loss of 6 seats so far. There's definitely more to come. Interestingly, I'm not sure if you guys there remember at home when Biden said at the last debate that he would transition away from fracking, and some Democrats got pretty finicky about that. This is clearly a live enough issue to at least scare some energy state Democrats off. Kendra Horn, a Democrat representative in Oklahoma, tweeted, "We must stand up for our oil and gas industry. We need an all-of-the-above energy approach." And Xochitl Torres-Small, a Democrat rep in New Mexico, tweeted, "I disagree with Biden's statements tonight. Energy is the backbone of New Mexico's economy." Okay, now both those Democrats, they just lost. They were 2 of the 8 that lost. One of them lost by just 4 points. So, did Joe Biden cost the Democrats a seat or 2 during that debate? Maybe. We can't know, obviously. But for everyone who leaves the House, some arrive. For the Republicans, they have at least 11 women who've won seats, with it seems a lot more to come. It's working out for them. There might be more in the future. And one of the youngest congressional reps ever, 25-year-old Madison Cawthorn, won in North Carolina, turning the page on Trump and his administration, creating a brand new, inspirational brand of politics from the moment he was elected, tweeting out, "Cry more, lib." He seems nice.
He's going to fit right in.
Yes. Look, there's more newcomers as well, including 4 more activist progressives in Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Maureen Newman and Mondaire Jones. So it's possible, if Nancy Pelosi has a much smaller margin, and I think she's about to, and the squad is twice as big, from 4 to 8, she might need moderates and the extended squad at the same time to pass a budget in the House. Things might get very testing in the next 12 months or so. Now, John, I know you love it when I get into the weeds about the states.
Yes, literally the weeds.
But quickly, there wasn't much movement amongst governors or state legislatures in this election. The Republicans won 1 governorship in Montana and state legislatures in New Hampshire. That's it. Otherwise, everyone stayed the same. But what matters is who controls redistricting. That's what counts, because since America is utterly dysfunctional, partisan politicians draw the boundary lines of House districts. And if the same party controls the whole legislature, they can do whatever they like. They can basically rig it for their own party. Now, this year is a census year, so they are going to be redrawing those boundaries next year, possibly rigging the House for a decade in certain seats, only in certain seats. So, who's in control? After the election, the boundaries of 181 districts will be totally drawn by Republicans. The boundaries of 76 districts will be totally drawn by Democrats. The two parties will share responsibility for 60 districts. 124 districts will be drawn by independent commissions, and 7 districts are just states. So Republicans will be holding the whip hand for the next decade, it seems, just like they did from 2010 onwards. Finally, John, a quick run through the ballot initiatives. You mentioned the weed, that's right. These guys are a little bit like statewide plebiscites, okay, on election day. Alaska and Massachusetts both rejected our preferential voting system. Fie on you! Puerto Rico voted that it wanted to be a state. California voted to not allow racial preferences in employment. That's about trying to make affirmative action work. They voted that down. Florida voted for a $15 minimum wage. 4 states, there you go, Johnny. 4 states voted for legalising marijuana for recreational purposes. 2 states voted for medical marijuana. Oregon voted to legalise magic mushrooms. And Oregon weren't finished there. They also voted to partly decriminalise all drugs, where people have a choice of either a $100 fine or taking a health assessment at an addiction recovery centre. That is going to be interesting, John.
Yeah, I'm taking $100 and going to Oregon, I think. Now let's take a look at the state of the race for the US Senate. That is much better news for Republicans tonight, who were looking down the barrel of being tossed into the minority. They went in, of course, with a 53-47 majority. So far, the GOP's Tommy Tuberville has won back deep red Alabama from Democrat Doug Jones with an almost 20-point margin. Remember, Doug Jones only won that because he was literally running against a pedophile last time. In Colorado, the Democrats picked up Senator Cory Gardner's spot. Former governor and presidential hopeful John Hickenlooper has won that for the Democrats easily. So 1 up, 1 down, status quo. But Republicans really managed to hold the line in races that had looked very, very competitive, if not doubtful, in the polls. Look at Joni Ernst there in Iowa, Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, not even close, Susan Collins hanging on in Maine, all massively outspent by their Democrat challengers, but back again with surprising ease. The only hope now that Democrats have of claiming a Senate majority rests with Mark Kelly taking Arizona from Martha McSally. That looks very likely. Some have already declared that, Chaz. That would make a 52-48 Republican majority. Democrat Cal Cunningham taking North Carolina looks very unlikely, so all eyes now turn back to Georgia once again. In the regular Senate election, Republican David Perdue has just today slipped below 50% of the vote. And if that holds, there will be an automatic runoff election against John Ossoff in early January. There will definitely be a runoff, meanwhile, in the Georgia special Senate election. Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler was appointed last year to that position after Johnny Isakson resigned for health reasons. She came second in this primary to the Democrat, the Reverend Raphael Warnock. But these special elections are weird. They're also the primary. So there were other Democrats and other Republicans in this particular contest. So now Warnock and Loeffler, as the 2 top candidates, go head-to-head in this runoff in January. So, Chaz, for Democrats to get to those 50 Senate seats, which, if they then have the casting vote of Vice President Kamala Harris, who will resign from her Senate seat in California if elected, but that will be replaced with a Democrat by the Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom before there is an election. They would have to win both of those Georgia Senate seats, and given the huge amounts of money that have gone into these Senate races, we can imagine for both sides now, if the majority in the Senate is on the line, this could be $200, $300, $400 million splashed between now and January.
But wait.
What?
What if Dr. Al Gross comes to the rescue?
Who's that again?
That's a great question.
Who is he?
Over in Alaska, he is an independent who caucuses with Democrats. And according to him, he says the dynamics of the Alaska Senate race this hour remain in a state of flux, with approximately 44.6% of the ballots not yet counted. We believe we will win once every vote has been counted in the Senate. Thing is, he's only at 31% at the moment, so he's pretty cocky. But look, I don't know if he knows something we don't know, but if he did win, then, and he counts as a Democrat, then they only need to win one of the two Georgia Senate runoffs, which is still going to be hard anyway.
We've got a lot to talk about in the next few weeks, and when we're back next year, Chaz. Finally this week, though, we're going to take the tempo down just a little bit. For almost half a century, Bob Woodward has been the most famous journalist anywhere in the world, ever since he and fellow Washington Post reporter Carl Bernstein followed the money and lifted the lid on the Watergate scandal that brought down President Richard Nixon. Since then, Woodward has become the first draft of history for 9 presidencies, feared by all of them, but impossible to ignore. Woodward's most recent book, Rage, was based on hours of interviews with President Trump and some of his closest advisors. It revealed a president deliberately downplaying the dangers of the emerging coronavirus pandemic to the public early this year, and then failing to adequately respond to that danger. This interview was recorded before Election Day. We discussed a range of issues around covering the presidency as a reporter, as well as Bob Woodward's career and the practice of journalism in 2020. Whether it's President Trump or previous presidents, is there a kind of presidential power that is imposed on journalists that maybe affects the way they report?
Well, yes, I think to a certain extent, but you want to be respectful. At least that's my approach. But I also think you can't hold back and not ask the tough questions. In the 19 interviews I did with President Trump for this book, I did not hesitate to ask. He would bring up all the old investigations of him, the impeachment, the Mueller investigation, and just be on fire about it. And finally, at one point, I told him, I said, you know, your angst and distress about those investigations, which are over, are keeping you from focusing your energy on dealing with the coronavirus. He didn't agree or disagree, but I was not hesitant to say that because I think that's really true.
Was that you simply putting a proposition to the president when you're suggesting these things to him? Where's the journalistic line there, I guess I'm asking?
Well, after you do hours and hours of interviews, he's not a person who observes lines himself. So I think like 6 months ago in April, I went through 12 specific things that needed to be done, not my recommendation, but the recommendations of doctors and people who were experts on this, including you need to totally mobilize the country. You need to have a kind of a Manhattan Project, which refers to what President Roosevelt did before World War II in building the first atomic bomb. And he really didn't do it. He didn't listen, but I was simply reporting. Now, my wife, who listened to that conversation, after it was over, said to me, you're shouting at him, and it sounds like you are telling him what to do. And I said, well, I'm not telling him what to do. I'm reporting what experts say need to be done, and I'm asking if he's going to do those things. And my wife Elsa was thought I had crossed the line. And I said, I didn't think I'd did. I could understand lots of people would. But I said, this is a different time. And this is a crisis. And there's no way even a reporter can hold back. I'm not making recommendations. I'm simply conveying what people have said. But she's right. But if you deal with Trump, you've got to shout. If you don't shout and interrupt, you're going to listen to long speeches.
That must have been very tempting, Bob, to try and really, with that access that you had, those many hours, to be offering advice, because you know the president's turning on Tucker Carlson tonight and listening to his advice, and that's maybe having as big an impact as Anthony Fauci.
Well, maybe that's possible. This is Fox News. It is something he tunes into frequently. But I think on the virus, and we played some of these tapes of my interviews with him, and very early on, from my reporting, I established that, I mean, think of this now. This was only 10 months ago. The end of January this year, his national security people went to him and said, Mr. President, this virus is going to be the biggest national security threat to your presidency. And they laid out chapter and verse that the virus in China was going to come to the United States. It was spread through the air. It was worse than flu. And of course, 7 or 8 days later, when I interviewed him, now I didn't know what had happened on January 28th. It took me until May of this year to figure that out from reporting. But in February, he told me all of this, and I thought he was just talking about China, because China was locked down. If you recall, they in China locked down 768 million people, half their population. Can you imagine doing that? So that was the focus.
That's interesting, Bob, because when your book came out in September, as well as generating a lot of news, there was also a lot of criticism. People saying, hey, why did Woodward sit on this for so long? He saw this disconnect between what Trump was being told, and he was admitting that he was trying not to panic the American public. Have you had second thoughts about that, or are you comfortable with that decision that you decided to keep this in May?
But see, it was a non-decision. Because when he told me that in February, all the talk was about China. I thought he was talking about China. And as you know, as a reporter, I can't ask or respond to something I don't know. And I only learned in May what had happened in January that was the seed of his knowledge about how serious the virus was. And by May, everyone knew it was airborne, knew that it was a pandemic, knew it could be spread by people who didn't show symptoms. This is the luxury of doing a book, that you don't have to report things. But I could have not reported anything because I'd like to say I figured it out. I did not figure it out until May. But that's the crucial event. When the histories of this are written about what happened in the United States, it's going to begin on January 28th, when it was laid out to him in a very authoritative way by one of his deputies, who actually had been a reporter in China during the SARS epidemic in 2003, and he knew that the Chinese lied and covered up.
I would imagine, Bob, you're sick of parallels to Watergate, but I'm wondering, is that late January briefing to the president, is that the equivalent to the smoking gun tape? What the president knew when, he knew it in January?
No, actually what it's equivalent to is the Watergate burglary, because that's when you start the movie. And yes, the smoking gun tape came out 4 days, occurred in secret in the White House 4 days after the Watergate burglary. We didn't find out about that until August of 1974. It was over 2 years to get to the bottom of that.
Last week, we discovered the author of that anonymous op-ed that was published famously in the New York Times and the subsequent book being Miles Taylor, a former Chief of Staff to the Department of Homeland Security. What are your thoughts on that? Should he have been granted anonymity to write that op-ed and write that book, or is that somebody who really should have been prepared to put their name to their claims?
Well, it was right after my book, Fear, in 2018, which is my first book on Trump, came out, and it had very specific examples of people defying Trump, taking papers off of his desk, resisting him. And I was told by somebody at the New York Times, because several days later they released that op-ed column, that they were kind of sitting on it, they weren't sure, and that they felt this kind of gave them license to publish it without any specifics. You didn't know what department, you didn't know what the White House, you didn't know anything. And I never thought much of that op-ed piece or the book. In fact, I thought zero about it because I didn't know who it was. I didn't know who was talking. I use unnamed sources, but all my incidents are described with specific people at specific times and exactly what was said and what happened. So I think that's not, as I say, I think zero of it.
Do you think, Bob, that reporters have become any more sceptical or towards the president, given the 25,000 false or misleading claims that the fact checkers have identified? Or is the trade of journalism essentially the same, whether it's President Trump, President Obama, President Bush?
I think more impact on journalism has been the internet, the culture of impatience and speed. Give it to me now. Give me one word. Give me one sentence. And of course, I'm swimming against all of that. I want to spend time. I want to go back. I want to write books, the long form story of what happened. I think by and large, the reporters for my newspaper, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, do a spectacular job, but they have to do it every day. And I can say, okay, I've got this, or I could interview Trump on a Wednesday and think about it, talk to some people in the White House, somebody in the CIA, somebody in the Pentagon, and then kind of map out my questions. And he gave me a number where I could call, and he'd answer right away, or it was through an intermediary, or he would call me back. So, that's an extraordinary opportunity for a reporter. And because I have done this almost for 50 years, studied the presidency, written about 9 presidents, that's a lot. And so I've thought about the presidency, what the office is, how it works. As I was saying earlier, the extraordinary power they have. Trump has exercised that. Has he exercised that wisely? Has he addressed the key problems of the coronavirus? I think on the list of things that are important, that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. The next problem, and it's coupled with this, is the economy, and then next, race relations in this country, which I don't think he really understands. And I asked him about that, and he mocked me for worrying about the Black people in this country and their anger and pain.
We appreciate you and your work, including your latest book, Rage. A pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you are watching Planet America's Fireside Chat live, unless you're watching it later, pre-recorded. But just to prove we're live now, breaking news. The news is broken again, Chaz.
Yes, this is even bigger news than before.
Tell me.
Someone at CNN uses Pornhub.
What?
That's right, Jonathan King was messing around with the TV screen. They had Pornhub up there, and he's should look. I've just tweeted it out. Have a look, Chaz_USA.
Well, that's embarrassing, and I imagine Jeffrey Toobin is now very happy, as is Rudy Giuliani. But while John King was at that board, he was pointing out the fact that Joe Biden has now taken the lead in Georgia.
That is also news.
Oh, yeah.
This is a cricket ball through a broken news already. As I said, Biden is ahead in Georgia. He's ahead by 917 votes. There hasn't been any update since then. That's 0.2%. If it stays within 0.5%, that's going to be a recount. It'll probably be a recount even if it's more than 0.5% because they can pay for a recount if they want. And it's going to be very close.
Yep.
Now, the significance of this is that before, when I was fumbling around trying to work out the numbers in my head, I was saying, that means Biden's at 269. That is if everything that is already called, not including Arizona, you add Georgia to that, Biden's on 269. What that means is that Trump cannot get more than 269, even with Arizona.
And for viewers of Veep, they will know if it's 269 versus 269, what happens then? It goes to the House of Representatives, and Democrats wait before you think, hey, that's terrific. The Democrats have the majority in the House. Yes and no, Chaz?
Yeah, no. The way it works is that each state gets one vote, depending on how many congressional reps they have. The Republicans have more states, 26 to 22.
It's all those Dakotas again.
Yeah, so he would win the presidency, but he can't win it.
Trump would win the presidency if it goes to the House.
But for that to happen, he has to win Nevada, where Biden's been ahead by 8% in the area where they're getting 90% of the ballots to come.
And the local experts say there's no chance of him winning Nevada.
Pennsylvania, that Trump would have to win.
And the local experts are saying there's no chance of him winning Pennsylvania.
Biden only needs 18,000 out of 175,000 ballots. He's been coming home like a freight train. Trump is not going to win there either. Trump would also have to win
You're calling
North
it
Carolina.
again. You're calling the election. Take that, Anthony.
Biden's president.
Biden is president. Yeah, well, not officially. It won't be official until December when the Electoral College sits. And as we discussed earlier with our good friend Paul Smith, there are a lot of legal challenges, but none of them so far have been anything but small, trivial matters.
And
so there are going to be recounts.
None of them involve states which are in Biden's corner right now.
Yeah.
There are Pennsylvania, Nevada, states which are out there still.
It's over. It's over, Chaz. It's over.
It's unless saying 0.0001%. It's not over. It's over.
Yeah. Well, let's just hope things settle down and we get to see this happen for real.
They're not going to settle down.
But that is it for another Fireside Chat. Stay with ABC News now for updates throughout the course of the night and on this weekend as well. We'll see you on ABC TV on Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. for a trip to Planet America.
And you can find both shows on ABC, iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And to take us out this week, some more from Paula White with a little bit of help from former Age journo Tim Dutre, Eminem and a particularly cute white cat. Enjoy this.